2019 Emerging Curator Institute Fellow and has curated at Cedar Cultural Center, High Point Center for the printmakers, Artistes Inez Greenberg Gallery at MUID, Minneapolis Institute of Art, America's Gallery 261, and the University of St. Thomas. So she's an artist. So we're really happy to have Alex here with us. And our other speaker is Robert Lilligren, and Robert is the CEO of NACDI and has been then the CEO since 2016. So I've known Robert for many, many years. And Robert was a member of the Minneapolis City Council for 12 years. Yeah. And that's where I got to know him, because I always get to know my city council people. And he was a great city council member, and he also has been involved at Robert is a White Earth Ojibwe from the nation, and he has served, and I think he's still serving on the Metropolitan Council. So he has great experience in the city of Minneapolis, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man. He's one of my favorite people. So let's give Alex and Robert a big welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for that incredible introduction. Thanks, Bryce, for getting us here. And I just want to really call out Peter and Jane as being such great neighbors. I got to know them. I'm a Phillips guy. I lived in Phillips for 36 years. I now live just about 2 blocks from here on Franklin and Pleasant. But that's when I got to know Peter and Jane, and they're incredibly great community-centered people. So I just really appreciate your kind words. So thanks. Alex and I will introduce ourselves, but first I want to start by introducing myself in Ojibwe language, which was my grandmother's first language, my grandmother who lived out her life just about 2 blocks from here. So, Buju Nnueganaduk, Bawababi Genekag and Junjaba, Ojowish Koganesian and Dodem, Ogema Mishkwadesi, Nindigenous. So I introduced myself by my tribe, White Earth, my clan, my Indian name. So now you know a little about me and my place in this world. And I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Robert. Oh, this one's a little bit stronger. Good morning. My name is Alex Buffalohead. I'm Bedawakantuan, Dakota. I'm enrolled in Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, so that's in North and South Dakota, but my people are from here, and I live in the Twin Cities, and so I have a newer position, so I need to update my bio, so thank you for reminding me that. I'm the Director of Communications and Branding and of Partnerships at NACDI, and I've been there for about 6 years, and just very honored and excited to meet and speak with you all today.
Right, and huge thanks, Chimigwech, to Alex for stepping in for John. Just so folks know, nothing bad has happened to John. He has an opportunity as a production team member of a native production company to pitch his latest movie to Fox Entertainment. So he was really disappointed he couldn't be here, but I'm like, go do that. So yeah, so I'm the President CEO at Native American Community Development, NACDI, and maybe we can go to the, oh, that's us, looking so good. So just to start, and beyond land acknowledgement, and hey, Elizabeth, my good friend and former colleague, land acknowledgements are important, as we all know, and then it's how do we move beyond the acknowledgement. And I'm proud, as a Met Council member and who runs Metro Transit, that we have invested in a local artist, Marlena Miles, who is a former NACDI employee, All My Relations Arts Assistant Director, and she created this rap. Has anyone seen this out on the streets? Yeah, isn't it cool? I was just texting with Marlena last night and saying, I just feel good every time I see this. So we are on Dakota land, and as we go about our business today, as we go about our business every day, I just think it's important for us to remember that. So that's a good visual reminder. Okay, we can go beyond that, don't you think? Yeah, okay, all right. Enough about us. So this is what we'll be talking about today. We're going to go kind of quickly because we really want to get to dialogue. I hope you're interested in that, questions and things. So I'm going to do 500 years of history in about 45 seconds to start, and we'll see, and then talk about the Native community here and nationally and in contemporary context. And Native people have suffered from a lack of sort of contemporary awareness and visibility, and that has really been changing just over the last few years. So we'll talk about that for a minute, the strengths here, the growth. We'll talk about NACDI, or Alex will talk about what we do and about our programs, and then we'll invite you on down to visit us at a series of events, but then get to the question and answer part, right? So here we go, and I'm not a historian, I am not a scholar, I am not an Indian law expert at all. But at this point, I just think it's important to acknowledge that for centuries, since the arrival of Europeans, even before there was a United States, there were deliberate efforts to remove the people who were here, to take ownership of the land, and when the country formed, those got formalized into laws, into acts, into federal strategies that were meant to first eliminate the people from the land, and through strategies of genocide, right? Really just eliminate them. And when that proved too difficult or too expensive, then the federal strategies shift to strategies of forced assimilation. So the boarding schools, I'm sure everyone here has heard of some of that history anyway. I don't know a Native family around today that doesn't have a family boarding school story. Mine was my grandmother, right? She was taken from her home with her siblings and cousins, forced into boarding school, where she had her culture and language beat out of her, then returned to the reservation as a sort of an unwitting tool in a forced assimilation strategy. So rather than go through all that history, just to sort of acknowledge that Native people have been victims, we are survivors of a genocide, and so we like to acknowledge that, or we want to acknowledge that. And then things happened around the middle of the last century. And for me, and we'll highlight a couple of what are, for me, these kind of movement moments, but one of them was the founding of the American Indian Movement, or AIM, in 1968, right here in South Minneapolis, right on Franklin Avenue. That's today's chief executive of American Indian Movement, Frank Perro, a good friend of our community and neighborhood. And AIM was radical, right? It was Native people who had moved here during assimilation. Do folks know when I talk about the Assimilation Act? Okay, thanks. So about the middle of the last century, the federal government strategically and deliberately moved residents from reservations into urban centers across the country. And kind of depending on which side of the question you're on, you could say that it was an effort to move Native people to where there were greater opportunities for education, housing, healthcare, employment, and commitments were made to Native people. If they came to the urban centers, these things would be provided. Those commitments never materialized in any community, but it did create a dynamic urban Indian population. We would consider ourselves urban Indians. I'm a third generation Minneapolis urban Indian because of the Relocation Act. And so suddenly you had this dynamic sort of pan-Indigenous community growing here, and because we're Minnesota, because we're Minneapolis, and people get involved here, people came together and formed the American Indian Movement primarily to protect their Native relatives, mostly from police brutality, but also from other kinds of violence. And then that grew and grew into an international movement that helped advance the United Nations rights of Indigenous people worldwide. They organized globally. So one of, or two primary objectives of the American Indian Movement. One was to establish progress in the contemporary Native community on re-embracing of our history, culture, languages, spirituality, and family ways. And many of these simple fundamental activities in the US had been illegal in our country until 1978, when a lot of federal legislation was passed, the American Indian Freedom of Education Act, Freedom of Religion Act, and things. But before that, it was illegal to practice Native spirituality practice and family practices off the reservations. It was illegal in the US. The other big objective of AIM was to establish agencies that could advance Native people based on this foundation of tradition, language, and things. And they were very successful. They were particularly successful here in the Twin Cities. And because of that, we have partners, just within a few blocks of our office, there are probably 40 or 50 offices of Native organizations, tribes, and things that are engaged in supporting our community and bringing forward a brighter future. Mm-hmm. Should we go to the next? I'm not even sure what's coming up. This is a brand new slide presentation. So I often feel, so we had our founders, many of you know who they are, Clyde Belcourt, for example, Laura Waterman Whitstock. I consider these people our founders, and they are walking on now, and so we have their legacy. We have this infrastructure they put together, this voice they've helped us find, and so, Alex is a younger generation than me, but I feel kind of like a bridge. What do we do with this legacy, this rich legacy that we've been given here? And I'll get into a little, that's what NACDI is trying to do. But here are just a couple of other pivotal points for me in my development and my sort of perspective on the world. And one of them is Standing Rock, and I'm guessing most of you know what I mean by Standing Rock. And so that was an opposition movement, peaceful and prayerful protest to the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And people came together at Standing Rock. First, the 7 council fires of the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota people, but then it built outward. And I was able to spend some time during the peaceful and prayerful protests there, and it profoundly changed my perspective. And really what I learned was that we can go forward by going backward, right? We can anchor ourselves on the foundation of tradition, but then really build something contemporary and new. And it also brought a level of visibility to Native people, Native causes, Native ways, that it just accelerated the movement. Big movie stars were showing up at Standing Rock and helping to be good allies and popularize the movement and Native issues. And then the other one, and this photo is in front of what was the site of the Wall of Forgotten Natives. Do folks remember this from 2018? The enormous homeless encampment that grew up right on the American Indian Cultural Corridor, right on Franklin Avenue, kitty corner from our office. And some 300 of our unsheltered relatives, primarily Native people, ended up living there in this really inadequate strip of Minnesota Department of Transportation right away, right next to Highway 55, right next to the light rail. And it was an occupation movement, right? So we had Highway 55 with tens of thousands of cars going by, Hiawatha Light Rail, Blue Line, with tens of thousands of riders every day, went by this encampment that was definitely demonstrably Native, and saw it, right? So for a very brief time, people were painfully aware of the generational impacts of genocide and forced assimilation. This is the result. I remember speaking in front of the Minneapolis City Council then and saying, if your goal was genocide and elimination, this is success. Congratulations. So now we need to figure this out. And so one of the things our organization did was worked with MnDOT, who's still very interested in memorializing what happened here. They know it was something important and not something that they can just pass over. And in the interim, we did as we're trying to figure out what to do there permanently, MnDOT funded us to do a community engagement process with a brilliant young artist, Courtney Cochran, right here in the middle. And she engaged the community, and they put together a project called Never Homeless Before 1492, which became a kind of a rallying cry during the Wall of Forgotten Natives era and during the civil unrest post George Floyd. And so this was installed. I remember the commissioner of Mendota at the time was Margaret Anderson Kelleher, who now works at the City of Minneapolis, an important position, good friend. And we met about how to structure this community engagement process and this project. And I said, well, you know, if we authentically engage the community, you're going to hear things that aren't really pleasant and then what you might not like. And I can't guarantee that you're going to be really satisfied with the outcome if it's really community-based. And she's like, I don't care, you know, this is important. And sure enough, as we went through this process and it started to define itself as Never Homeless Before 1492, the MnDOT staff got really edgy about it. Like, oh my God, we can't put that on our property. And so I was able to circle back to Margaret and say, Margaret, you committed. And she's like, nope, 100%. So this has been beautifully received in the community, but also locally. For me, it was a turning point, right, a pivot point, when the broader community became more acutely aware of the challenges within our local Native communities and with our local Native relatives. And so it was a game changer for me. So what's happening now, and a lot of this focuses on NACDI stuff that will, Alex will get into in a minute, but really today, locally and nationally, we're in a time of reclaiming Native narrative. And there have been very deliberate and strategic efforts to put together plans and strategies and messages around reclaiming the Native narrative. And if anyone's interested, I would encourage you to just Google Reclaiming Native Truth, and that'll bring you to a whole set of strategies and plans, including strategies to be a good ally. And this happened about 10 years ago. It was 3 years of research and then strategy. I was invited into the national kind of brain trust that helped to put together strategies, but really the data that was generated was fascinating, or is fascinating. And one of the things that we learned was that almost half the people in the United States did not understand that Native people were still here today. It was all very historic. And at the time, if you Googled American Indian images, the first 90 plus images that you would see were pre-1915 images. So that just helped reinforce that. We're not contemporary, we're not relevant, and the truth is the Native communities are growing communities, and based on these fundamentals that AIM really tried to work to establish, we're re-embracing tradition, culture, language, spirituality has given us a stronger foundation to move forward. So when I look at people like Alex and her generation, these folks are growing up with so much stronger awareness of who they are, where they came from, their value as Native people. Whereas in older generations, and I count myself there, we were raised by people who were either raised by or the product of the boarding schools, where they were taught to be ashamed. You know, they were taught that there was not just no value, but there was great risk to expressing your Native identity. And so when Columbus first arrived here, and nobody knows the real number, but there were somewhere between 10 and 50 million people living in what is now the United States, what we would call Turtle Island. I usually use the number 20 million because it feels like a safe number. But in the 1970 census, there were somewhere around 250,000 people that identified as Native. And the differential between 20 million and 250,000 didn't just move away, right? They were eliminated, and or they didn't see value, they saw risk in identifying themselves as a Native, so they were in hiding. And that's a very common story in the Native community, where people are striving to make their way back to their cultures, their languages, their traditions. And so now there are about 5.5 million people in this country that identify as Native, and so, you know, growth, and I think that's really important. And there's vibrancy and strength in the community. We still have a lot of challenges, and we acknowledge that. But more and more organizations like ours, NACDI, Native American Community Development Institute, are coming together as asset-based agents within the community to leverage this assets, the people, the culture, the history, the innovation, the endurance, and others to come together and do that. So should we go to the next one, I think? So Alex will go here, but so NACDI came together about 10 or 12 years ago to do this, to be an asset-based intermediary here in the Native community. It was kind of a unique idea, a new idea. And we did a lot of education in the community about what being asset-based meant. So much of our infrastructure was service-based, needs-based by definition, and so we felt strongly that some people had to be working in an asset-based way. I'm thrilled to say now we're partners locally with probably somewhere around 10 other organizations that identify as asset-based. We work in an asset-based way to build capacity in the community so we can achieve our visions. And so I'll please turn to Alex to talk about some of what we do.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so NACDI, go ahead.
Oh, it's not my first time.
I agree. I was kind of thinking, I was like, maybe should I say like, wow, you're on fire right now. But thank you for saying that. So yeah, NACDI is a 501(c) organization started in 2007. And so really our mission is to amplify and advance the Native American community's vision for a vibrant and healthy community. And so through that, we focus in 4 areas of arts and culture, civic engagement, food sovereignty, and then it's kind of a mix between community engagement and the American Indian Culture Corridor. So we kind of tie those all together in one. And so our probably most well-known or kind of like our famous brand is the All My Relations Arts Gallery.
Who's been there? Folks know it? Oh, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for your support. So it's been in existence since 1999 and used to be in the ancient Traders Building and then moved to NACDI in 2010 to its current location. So we're in Powell Grounds Coffee, so you're welcome to come get coffee, see a show, come to our workshops. And so some of the artists that we've worked with and collaborated with have been Andrea Carlson, the late Jim Denemy, John Quick to See Smith, Maggie Thompson, Jonathan Thunder, and probably hundreds more. So you're welcome to visit our website to learn more about our artists. We offer a literature program called the Native Authors Program to help promote just having access to folks to be able to publish more. So we're not only supporting fine art, but literary arts. And then we also have a partnership with the Hennepin Theater Trust nonprofit organization. And so we have a program called We Are Still Here. And this year's cohort, we have a mentor and I believe 4 artists, and they're focusing more on community engagement and public art. So past years we've done digital art and then worked with Clear Channel to promote artist messaging on billboards throughout Minnesota. So they've gotten this like national recognition. So it's really a powerful program. Our past directors and curators have been Hyde Erdrich, who's the current Minneapolis Poet Laureate.
Folks know her, Hyde, former board member, very supportive.
Very supportive. And Deanne Whitehawk, who's MacArthur Genius recipient. And then Angela Two Stars is our current director. She is like a nationally renowned public artist who has works at Videma-Casca and the Walker Art Center. Just I'm a fan.
Do folks have heard that name, Angela Two Stars? She did the piece at the Sculpture Garden that was sort of Walker's response to the dreadful scaffold project, so she was engaged to do that.
So yeah,
big
we
deal.
often go in kind of risky spaces and bring in community elders to try and problem solve and figure out how we can work together. So we often work with not only Native American organizations and kind of grassroots folks, but non-Native BIPOC groups as well. So our other areas are Four Sisters food sovereignty, and so I'm still trying to figure out how I speak about like what is food sovereignty, and I think a helpful way to think about it is that foodways are not inherited, that cultural knowledge is mixed with colonization with our loss of land, language, and culture. And so this is the right for us as people to figure out ways that we can use healthy and culturally appropriate food that is produced in ecological and sustainable ways, and that it's our right to define what that is. And so, go ahead.
And food was used as a tool for colonization, restricting, killing all the buffalo, restricting access to salmon fishing in the Northwest. So this is an important movement, the food sovereignty movement within Native communities, globally, really.
Absolutely. So we have a urban farm on the Midtown Greenway on 17th Avenue South, and our aim is to help continue reclaim land and cultural knowledge of plant knowledge and food knowledge. And we're part of the Indigenous Food Network, which one of our partners is Dream of Wild Health. And so they have a farm in Hugo, and they're a great organization working with Indigenous youth and culture bearers and elders to revitalize not only loss of language and culture, but bringing back those teachings and seed-keeping knowledge. And so at the farm we have art fixtures, we have community garden plots, we have a free library that has information on food sovereignty, we host events in the season and workshops, and then we have our Four Sisters Farmers Market, which will be opening June 6th, so we invite you to come there.
Thursdays, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, and so we host... Yes, thank you. So that's in our parking lot, 1414 East Franklin, and so we host cooking demonstrations, cultural demonstrations. Folks give lessons on Indigenous food, wild rice, manoma, and piscine. Okay, I didn't know if you want to add.
Well, music, there's just a lot. It's kind of, as Peter and Jane can tell you, it's kind of one of the places to sort of be and be seen on the American Indian Cultural Corridor. There's always something happening there.
There really is. Yeah, and so then our other kind of tier is civic engagement, and so our main, our other third program is Make Voting a Tradition, which is in its 10th year of programming, and so it's year-round, culturally specific, multi-generational approach to increasing voter turnout in the American Indian community. And so we found that folks are more likely to be engaged when peers, people that they know, family, are telling them, helping inform, helping answer questions, having aunties or grandmas or moms scolding you you need to vote because our voices matter.
The anti-strategy.
and then we've kind of combined, so we don't separate art and culture. And so with Make Voting a Tradition, we've partnered with others to create swag materials, promo campaign materials based on imagery on issues that are important to our people, like climate change issues, ICWA. I'm trying to think of what
ICWA. Indian Child Welfare Act.
Water is life.
Huge. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's ongoing. I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to...
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our biggest thing is we want to invite you or continue coming to the American Indian Culture Corridor. I'm not sure if folks know Maria's. They have wonderful
Cafe.
food.
We're just on the right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Corn pancakes.
Yes.
The
really
corn
good.
Pancakes are out of this world.
And then on May 1st, the Minneapolis American Indian Center is going to be having a grand opening on the 1st, so you're all welcome. Gatherings Cafe will be returning, which we were talking about how much we missed them earlier. And they also have a gallery called Two Rivers Gallery, so I believe they're going to have a permanent collection and then a changing gallery. But it's a beautiful and important center for us. And then so All My Relations Arts has a current exhibition called Okizi to Heal. So if you haven't seen it, this is your last week to see it until April 13th. And then it's a partnership with the Swedish Institute focusing on cultural revitalization with folks of Sami, Swedish, and American Indian descent.
Are folks familiar with the Sami Cultures and Population School? Yeah, they're an indigenous community that suffered very similar genocide and forced assimilation. So it's been a really successful partnership with the American Swedish Institute.
Yeah, a lot of similarities. And then the next exhibition is called Alternative, which will be a solo show of paintings and sculptures by Frank Buffalo Hyde, who's Nez Perce, opening on May 9th. So if you want to learn more, feel free to visit our website. Somehow I missed it. Or maybe it didn't get there. I guess visit our website.
Okay, cool.
So we have the NACDI.org and allmyrelations.org. And then on May 21st, NACDI, we're co-hosting an open house with Powell Grounds and the American Indian Community Development
Corporation.
Thank you.
NACDI.
Thank you. Where we'll have music, food, and we'll be just there to meet folks in community.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Great job. And so May is, good job, American Indian Month here in the state of Minnesota. We're the only state that has May as an American Indian Month. That was an American Indian Movement initiative back in the 70s that created this. And so there's a lot going on in the state. You can link it through NACDI's website and to the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors website as well. And so most orgs locally hold some kind of open house. You're welcome to attend any of them. They're wonderful community celebrations, often sort of resource fairs. Ours is more just a party, with good food and good music, and not surprisingly, ours is one of the most popular of the open houses on the cultural corridor. And so just to recap, NACDI exists to ground ourselves in community through our projects and programs that Alex talked about, and then to affect systems change, right? And so we're often in the policy realm, we're often in that risky space, as Alex said, between Native communities and non-Native institutions and organizations, and educating the organizations how to be more engaged with the Native community. It's such rewarding work. And I get to work with incredible young Native professionals like Alex every day, so it's very rewarding for an elder like me. And we want to say miigwech and
Pidamayaye.
thank you. So that's thank you in Ojibwe and in Dakota, right?
Yep.
And then just open this up for conversation, and all questions are welcome. No, I think there's a mic over here. For the, no questions are unwelcome.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
So we have one in the back.
Anybody?
Right off.
In the back.
First of all, thank you very much for all you're doing. It's so crucial and so important. I worked at a Native American Teen Center on Franklin Avenue in the late 60s with George Mitchell. And the experience totally changed my life. My beliefs about God, my beliefs about society, my beliefs about everything. And so it has been a gift for my whole life. But I want to mention a woman from that time because she's forgotten, I believe. One day while I was working at the teen center, Harlan Downwind came running in and said, "My mom has come up with a name for the CIA, which was the Concerned Indian Americans at that time." And she said, he said she thinks it should be AIM, American Indian Movement. And I said, run down there and tell them, which he did. But Alberta Downwind, please remember her name. Yes.
Yeah, so miigwech for all of your work and for those beautiful words. And the Downwind family is very prominent in our local history, and so thanks for that reminder, and the reminder that a lot of the founders of that generation were women. Right, of a lot of our agencies and institutions, and so it's always good to recognize that. So,
thank you guys, that's wonderful. And I will also add, I'm glad she brought up George Mitchell, whom I had never heard of, but he walked into my office at the Star Tribune to try to educate me on the beginnings of AIM that I didn't know about. So he was a key founder in that. So a question for all of you, so on the plus side, Minnesota, things all turned around in the late 60s. So, yeah, you're right. You used to have to hide if you were Native. You used to look out. But then, and our state was pretty proactive. But it all goes back, I think, of you, Miss Buffalo, your dad was chair of the American Indian Studies Department, wasn't he? Or the American History?
My grandpa, Roger.
Oh, that was your grandpa, Roger, right,
but
okay.
My dad does teach at Augsburg, and he did teach
he does, okay.
At the U of M.
So guess what? I'm a geezer. I'm on the grandfather level. Well, what I mean is, so the university started the first Native American Studies program in about 69 or 70, I can't remember. Your grandfather was part of it. And the Minneapolis American Indian Center, in fact, so the first question is, how do you guys work together? Because it's been closed, as you know, for reworking, but you said it's reopening, and how are you working together? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah, do you want me to start? Sure. We work very closely together. So the Minneapolis American Indian Center was founded in 1972. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the first Indian centers. There was this movement to establish these in a lot of cities. I was really honored that during my time on the Minneapolis City Council, we transferred the ownership of the center from the city to the center itself and started to fund some maintenance and improvements. And we work hand in glove. And when Native people come to the city, they make their way to the Indian Center. So that's sort of a first point of contact. And this new investment, I serve on the Capital Campaign Committee. It's a $33 million investment in expanding and modernizing the Indian Center, making it more of a destination on the cultural corridor rather than exclusively a service center. And so we share a lot of space, we share a lot of programming ideas. Mary Lagarde, the CEO there, is part of what's called the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, or MUID, MUD, as we say the acronym in the community, which is a 50-plus-year-old leadership forum active within the Twin Cities, founded by 7 Native women who headed agencies 50-plus years ago, and it's very robust leadership. We have formal agreements with the City of Minneapolis, with Minneapolis Public Schools to do work. So under the umbrella of MUD, all of the organizations, most Native organizations, are working to indigenize the way we do business together and see that we're always leveraging resources. And I mean, this wasn't your point, but it kind of fits this point is, in the recent history, Native efforts, Native organizations have often been encouraged, taught to be in competition with each other for resources, for service personnel. And it's really been maybe the last 10 or so years that there's been this very deliberate effort to shed that colonized perspective that creates enemies of it. It's a mentality of scarcity, right? A colonized mentality. And really see how do we put all of our resources together for the good of our people. And it's been fairly successful, actually, more than I would have thought. Oh, here and then here.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion.
Yeah.
This question could be a little off the wall, and if you don't have the answer for it, that's fine, but it's something I think about from time to time. Given where we are in the United States and Minnesota today, in a more perfect world, what are the goals that we should be striving for? What is your vision for a more perfect world for our society and all the people in that society?
I love it. Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing would to be acknowledge our history and how this country was formed and off of like the bodies of Black and Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be like a step there.
Yeah, that
Yeah, sorry. I'd rather hear the echo is a little weird to me, so I'm not used to speaking to a mic. I think the first thing would be to acknowledge the history of this country, of like what's happened to Indigenous people and Black people. And I mean, my personal thing, it could be through many ways of like the government acknowledging it, change. I feel like we're starting to see those changes, and especially from the Standing Rock movement and from the murder of George Floyd, that we've been seeing more drastic changes of being included in rooms of all levels of systems.
That's it, right? And so we have difficult conversations to have, right? About really authentic, truth-telling kinds of conversations about every role in creating today's society. And then, my vision, and it's really up to the community, but it's to make space for these Indigenous ways. There's some 550, 560 recognized tribes in this country. This is native land that was stolen, and so to acknowledge that the prosperity that we enjoy today is built on stolen land, stolen labor, and nobody in the Native community feels like we can go back. That's not, there is a land back movement, how land can be returned to Native people, but how do we go forward in a better way? And I would say here in Minneapolis, we have incredible opportunities to have these maybe difficult conversations about restoration, reparations, and past harms here. And there's a lot of effort going on, and we're just really privileged at NACDI to be part of several of those conversations. But it's to make that space for Native people to not have to speak first or not have to defend, but just to listen. And if it makes you uncomfortable, sit with your discomfort. You know, it makes us uncomfortable every day. So, so just, it's to make that space for those voices to come forward. And we know from practicing that incredible things, magical things can happen when that space is created.
And it's probably, a lot of folks say like that next generations have access to their culture, to their language, that they feel empowered, that in a way like addiction, a lot of our addiction is like from our historical trauma, so ways that we're facing that and healing from that. I think that's a big part of our future.
Right, well said.
Thank you for being here this morning. Can you talk a little bit about the Native American Cultural Corridor and your vision for it, and how far west you may see that eventually coming?
Those are very dynamic and active conversations. I see Elizabeth has her hand up too, and I would be remiss if I didn't notice it. But thanks for asking. And so the idea of American Indian Cultural Corridor is to have a destination that is an economic engine that's driven by Native people and Native voices. And so the American Indian Cultural Corridor footprint is on East Franklin Avenue, but it's a growing footprint, to your point. But early in NACDI's being, my predecessor launched a big community engagement effort of planning and vision making that resulted in what's called the American Indian Community Blueprint. And it's still a foundational document to our work. And one of the initiatives that was outlined in that, or was lifted up there, was the idea of this American Indian Cultural Corridor. A destination, a place-based expression of local Native cultures. And Minneapolis is unique in the country to have this geography that is so strongly associated with the Native people. In most urban Indian communities, the first effort is to define a community. People are so dispersed by design, right? But here we happen to have settled in one sort of little area. And so we have this. If you go down on East Franklin, I'm sure you've seen it. There's Native art, Native imagery, Native architecture, Native organizations. That doesn't happen in other cities. And so the idea was to leverage that strong Native identity into creating this Native-directed economic development effort. And we've been fairly successful, in part because Native people and organizations own most of the real estate. And most of these efforts of cultural corridors, locally, nationally, are anti-displacement efforts. They're communities that are very much at risk of getting kind of swept away when higher wealth interests come in. So we have this land, and we're very serious about developing it. And so we're working with the Tourism Association here and other interests to create more definable guides to coming into the American Indian Cultural Corridor. And we worked with the City of Minneapolis and other policymakers in their comprehensive planning efforts to recognize cultural corridors that are called cultural districts in Minneapolis, to create permissive policies around them, ultimately funding and economic support as well. So I was around when the American Indian Cultural Corridor concept was first established. I think many of us wish it were already kind of a realized vision, but I'll tell you, one of the things I've learned is the community needs to drive it. The community needs to have the capacity to drive such a big initiative, and so the work that we do might feel a little slow at times, but it's really so community focused.
Well, we're at 10:50, so we have to break formally, but stay around.
Sure.
And Alex and Robert are going to stay, and we'll engage in conversation as long as you want. But let's give them a great round of applause. Thank you so much. It was really inspirational. So